Thank you so much for joining us tonight for our second annual Pappy Van Winkle dinner and our first year with Julian van Winkle from Pappy, CEO of Pappy. His daughter Carrie will also join us to talk about Pappy and Company. And we have Wright Thompson from ESPN's senior writer and the author of Pappyland, which I highly recommend you read. We'll start with the cocktails. You have the Stag Hatton and an old-fashioned. I would like to invite Jason Holstein from Southern Wine and Distributors, Southern Imports Pappy here in Delaware. Jason, if you can come up and just show us how to make these drinks that the folks are enjoying tonight.
Fantastic. All right, Ryan, we're going to be making a Stag Hatton. So let's jump right in there. First, let's grab some bitters. We have chocolate bitters here. Aromatic Angostura bitters work as well. Second, we're going to put some vermouth in there. I like to do the old-fashioned way, which is 2 parts whiskey, 1 part vermouth. Back in, I'd say the 60s, they went away from this, but we're going to do it the old-fashioned way. So that was 1 part vermouth. We're going to do, so that was 1 ounce. This is 2 ounces of the Stag. So this is a stirred drink, not like James Bond. We're not shaking this. I'm going to stir this drink for about a good half a minute.
Well, let me ask you then. So sweet vermouth or dry vermouth?
So sweet vermouth for Manhattans and dry vermouth for your martinis. That goes with gin or vodka. You're going to do the dry vermouth, but sweet vermouth we stick with for whiskey.
Can you open a bottle of vermouth and put it on your bar, or does it have to go in the fridge? How does it work?
They do recommend, it is a wine-based liqueur technically, so it is actually better, Ryan, to refrigerate your vermouth, so that's a good question.
That actually, you make it look easy, but that I'm guessing I cannot do that.
You can do it. Let's see, just spill a little bit.
I did buy a bartending book, though.
That's good. We're getting in there. We're starting, Ryan. All right. And a cherry on top. And here's your Stag Hatton.
Our next cocktail is the Old Fashioned.
So we have some orange peel prepared. This is simple syrup, so that's equal parts water to sugar. Let's go ahead and do a 1/4 ounce. And we're actually going to use a cherry as well. Some people do not like their old fashions with cherries, but we're going to be festive this evening. Alrighty. So we have our simple syrup, our orange peel, and our cherry at the bottom of our mixing glass. Let's go ahead and muddle these ingredients. I'm going to release some of the essential oils from the fruit. That should be good.
My wife says I need essential oils.
Is that all?
And other things.
Okay. Let's go ahead and add some ice. And let's go ahead and add 2 ounces of bourbon. This is another stirring cocktail. Sorry for all the James Bond fans out there.
I just figured when I was watching James Bond that shaking was the right way to get it. I didn't realize he was a rebel. I thought he was sophisticated.
He was a rebel with a cause, as it were. Alrighty. Let's add our ice to our glass here. We're going to go ahead and strain this cocktail.
Yeah, I hope to learn how to do that in the cocktail book.
And then we can garnish Actually, let's rim the glass first. We'll garnish with our orange peel, and let's throw another cherry in there. And that, my friends, is an old fashioned.
Thanks for being here. So excited to talk to Julian van Winkle, and I could not do it on my own. At least I was a little nervous to. So I asked my friend Carl Kadar to join me. He knows bourbon much better than I do. And what better place to talk to Julian than in Carl's man cave, probably the coolest man cave in Delaware. Lots and lots and lots of good music on vinyl, lots of bourbon, really good beer. Here we are, Carl Kadar and myself talking to Julian. They should have it. And we have Julian van Winkle joining us. So, Julian, if you can hear me, and you're down in Kentucky, thank you for joining us here in Delaware. How is Kentucky? How's the weather down there?
Hello, how you doing? Nice to hear from you. It's just like it usually is in the wintertime, 40 degrees and raining. So we can only stand so much of that before we got to go south a little bit anyway, or way up north to at least get some snow or something. But it's a little dismal, but it's not bad.
Well, I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us tonight. Of course, 2020 has been certainly a year for restaurants to navigate, so we're doing this usually in person, and tonight some folks here in the restaurant and then other folks at their home. So if you could just kind of maybe start with an overview of your company and some of the efforts that you've made since taking over, we'd love to hear it.
Well, sure. I don't know if you want a little brief history of where we come from, but obviously my grandfather, who was known as Pappy, he was a Julian P. Van Winkle Sr. He would have been if we were all three of us alive, but he started my family in the business before Prohibition, working for Mr. W.O. Weller and Sons in Louisville, Kentucky as a salesman, and operated with two other gentlemen, Mr. Stitzel, who ran the whiskey portion of that company, Stitzel Weller, and then Mr. Alex Farnsley, who was their a salesman also. And eventually those three started the modern day Stitzel Weller distillery, opened up Derby Day 1935 in Louisville. And their brands were Old Fitz, and eventually Old Fitzgerald, and eventually W.O. Weller, obviously. And eventually they started the Rebel Yell label and also Cabin Still. And my dad joined my grandfather before the war, World War II, and after World War II. He was a veteran, went away for about 3 years in the South Pacific, and he joined my grandfather after the war, and Mr. Stitzel and Mr. Farnsley had passed away, so it was my dad and Pappy and my Uncle King McClure ran the distillery. Pappy passed away in 1965, and Dad operated the distillery until 1972 when we had some family stockholder issues, and Dad was forced to sell the Stitzel Weller distillery to a conglomerate called Norton Simon at the time. He did not want to sell, was forced to. The whiskey business was not good at all back then in the late 60s, early 70s, so vodka and light whiskeys were taken over, so that was tough to hang on to a distillery that aged whiskey for 10, 12, 15 years sometimes. So it was tough. He sold the distillery, but he kept the old Rip Van Winkle label. So he actually started back in business immediately using stocks of whiskey that he had made himself at Stitzel Weller, and continued bottling mostly decanters back then. Most distilleries, Wild Turkey and Beam, made thousands of them, but the people didn't care about the whiskey as much as they cared about the decanters that they put them in, whether they be school bottles or wildlife bottles or coal miners, firemen, anything you could think of. Now it's funny because if you find one of these bottles, you throw away the china or the porcelain part of it if you want to, but the whiskey's the more important part. So what was kind of given away back then now is very, very rare to if you find one of those old dusty bottles. But that's what he did, and I joined him in 1977. And he passed away 4 years later, in 1981, and I operated the distillery, or my brand, Old Rip Van Winkle, started the Pappy Van Winkle brand in the mid-90s, and my son joined me in 2001, and grabbed him right out of college at University of Kentucky. And we operated the business ourselves, bottling myself in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, had a little bottling house. And in 2002, we did a joint venture with Buffalo Trace, which is still in effect these days. It's been, it's been 18, it'll be 19 years in June. We've been partners with them. So they produce our whiskey for us under our recipe. They own the W.O. Weller label, so that's the same recipe as ours, using wheated bourbon whiskey. And obviously the rest is kind of history, the way things have taken off. So it's been very lucky for us, and we're blessed to have a brand like that that's so popular.
I appreciate that. And, you know, I think, Carl, you were mentioning, we were kind of talking about how when you go through and tasting it to determine what goes into each bottle.
Yeah, you know, first of all, let me say, Mr. Van Winkle, that it's a great honor, and more importantly, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. Been a big fan of your whiskey for years, whenever I can get my hands on it, which is not that often. But I was reading in the Pappyland book about how you personally taste every barrel of the whiskey that eventually goes into the Pappy line each year. And I guess I was kind of curious. I know I read in the book that you have this taste for what used to be the old Fitzgerald coming out of Stitzel Weller that your grandfather used to make. And you must have an amazing palate to be able to find exactly the right whiskey to go into the Pappy line.
Well, it's not some. Thank you very much for all that. That's nice. Let me straighten this camera up a little bit. My son and I do taste either one or both of us, at least one of us, taste every barrel. And plus the staff at Buffalo Trace in their lab, they taste thousands and thousands of barrels every year because of all their high-end brands like Blanton's and Buffalo Trace and Eagle Rare. But it's not so much what, you know, I like what I like, and I'm 71 years old, so obviously that's kind of inbred. It is bred in me, I guess you call it. And then I know what I like, and I know what I'm used to, and what Buffalo Trace has produced for us is very close to, probably as close as you can get to what we used to produce at Stitzel Weller. So it's not so much, like I say, what we're looking for. It's just bad younger taste and bitter taste and harsh taste. Those barrels will throw out because they'll affect the whole batch if we don't throw them out, you know, let them age a little longer, or if they're completely bad, they'll be used for something else.
Speaking of the barrels that you throw out, there's a I guess I don't know if it's a myth or if it's true. The Weller 12 is supposed to be the Pappy reject, or the junior Pappy. Is there any truth to that? I mean, I know it's basically the same recipe as what goes into the Van Winkle line, but is it really the lower end, the reject, that doesn't make it each year into Pappy, or is it stand on its own?
No, they are the same barrels, and we are doing that now. We may maybe hope to tweak our distillation and entry proof and barrel proof and so forth down the road to make it a little closer to what we did at Stitzel Weller. But right now we're using the same barrels, but Weller 12 obviously is a bigger brand than ours. So they don't taste every barrel before they dump theirs. They make a bottling of it. So we taste every barrel, and the ones that are not quite right, we'll let them age longer or whatever. But you do find some differences. Some years people try the Weller 12 and taste ours, and they say theirs, you know, Weller's better. And some years, of course, it depends on who's tasting, but they're very close, obviously. But the only difference is that we taste every barrel, so we're a little bit more picky about exactly what goes in there, just because of the size of the amount of barrels we dump for a bottling. So it's you want to get them just right and not have anything in there that's it's going to be funky or throw
Julian,
the
this
taste
is
off,
Ryan.
flavor
Tonight
profile
we
off.
have folks, many like Carl, that are well versed in bourbon, and some folks like myself and others joining tonight that are much more novices. We're going to taste the 10 through the 23 year. Can you maybe give us some, maybe for the novices, what they're maybe looking for, or the different notes, or the characteristics that they're going to see as they taste through these bourbons of yours tonight?
Well, again, they're all the same mash bill, same recipe pretty much. The 20 and 23 are not Buffalo Trace distillation yet. They're our interim distillery. We call it the Burnham Distillery, which is still a wheated bourbon whiskey. But the 10-year, what you're going to find out as you get into the older ages of what we sell is a little more mellowness, and where the barrel obviously is taking effect and smoothing out some of the, even though the tannins are very strong, because bourbon has to be put in a brand new charred oak barrel. So the initial blast of oak and tannins and the chemicals in there make a big difference for those first few years. So our 10-year, which is our youngest, you'll get a big explosion of the char and the tannin and alcohol. And then is the 12 and 15, you taste those two, and the 12 is a little sweeter because it's picking up the sugars in the barrel. And then the 15, right in between obviously the 10 and 20, it's a lot more flavor. All the wine and whiskey nerds that describe all these great flavors that are in beverages these days can pick up 1,000 different notations of what they're tasting, but it's mainly some citrus and some just some mellowness. It calms the bite on the tongue is a lot less, even though our 15 year is 107 proof. It's a lot smoother. And then when you get up to the 20 year, that's what I used to call butter whiskey, because it's so smooth on the tongue and really sweet. And then as you start to get to the 23, then you get something that's definitely an after dinner sipping type of whiskey, like a cognac, because it's obviously got some wood to it, and it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it's, for that particular after dinner sipping, maybe with an ice cube or something, it's that's perfect for that. So it's really just the maturing of different flavors and more flavors, and then it kind of levels off. If you let bourbon age too long in the barrels, it becomes less sweet, and the barrel turns against you, so to speak. So you don't really see many 27, 8, 30-year-old bourbons out there, because number one, the barrels will probably be empty if you let them sit that long. But number two, the tannins take over and the sweetness goes away, and it's just not worth it to keep the bourbon in the barrel that long.
Well, unlike you, Julian, I just can't bring myself to drink the bourbon with some ice and a twist of lemon. But I prefer it straight up. But I think the folks here this evening would really like to know a little bit about why wheated bourbon. I mean, most bourbons are mostly predominantly corn, of course, and there's a little rye, and there's a little malted barley. The Van Winkle bourbons are wheated. The rye is gone, and there's wheat in the place of the rye. Why wheat?
We don't completely know where the wheated formula came from. Whether it was Mr. Weller that my grandfather worked for, or Mr. Stitzel was making that whiskey. It could have come from the old Fitzgerald brand that Pappy bought back around Prohibition, and we're not sure who started it, but my grandfather really liked it, and it aged a little quicker, so that you could sell, after Prohibition, you could sell a 4 or 5 year old whiskey made with wheat versus rye a little sooner, and it was a little better because it would age a little quicker. Now saying that, when you age wheated bourbon whiskeys a little longer, like 15 and 20 and 23 even, they don't pick up as much of the wood and tannins in the barrels. They kind of age more gracefully. The rye recipe tends to bring out more of the astringent notes that might want to give you a little bite on the tongue or your back of your throat and so forth. So it's Pappy just liked it, and obviously it's what my father and I kind of grew up enjoying, and so we've stuck with it. And it just, not that rye recipe bourbons are any better than wheated bourbon recipes, but it's something we like, and obviously some other people like it too. So we've just kind of stuck with that same idea. But to answer your question, I don't know. We don't know exactly where the wheated. There's some theories on all this, but bourbon history is crazy because not a lot of it was written down. So we don't know the first distiller that was in Kentucky or that made bourbon, or it could have been Elijah Craig or Doc Crow or whatever. But not much of this is written down, so it's all kind of conjecture as far as how these stories came about.
Well, however it happened, it's fabulous stuff, and it's so much more distinctive than many other bourbons that are made with the traditional rye mash bill.
Tasting your bourbons, and I think a lot of folks, I think you mentioned it once, is, it's like the one thing that, if you're super rich, you might not necessarily be able to get a bottle of Pappy's because you just might not be able to find it. And so, in Delaware, it's hard to get. We have 150 people joining tonight that are all going to get to taste through all the years, and that's, I think, a good way of sharing it. There's a few ounces that we'll have left in the bottles, but those ounces we'll make available at the restaurant, so if folks come down to the restaurant, they can taste it as well. I think that's pretty good. The 23 year, what was the first year that you released that? Was that late 90s or when your son joined, or what was the first year that you released the 23?
I think it was mid 90s and maybe 96, 97. I've got all these old bottling records that we kept when I had my bottling plant in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, which operated from 83 until 2001. So, I could look a lot of this stuff up, but it was about 96 or 97 when it started.
You could have saved a couple of those bottles and sold them on eBay. And then,
I could, but it's illegal to sell liquor without a license, so I don't want to go there.
This is probably a side, or maybe some of the folks that like trading those bottles or whatever they're doing. But as restaurants, we appreciate what you've done as a family to kind of curtail that, because it gives us the opportunity to get these bottles and get them into our customers' hands and not charge an arm and a leg for it. So we're able to do a whole dinner tonight, and we did a couple of the Buffalo Trace products for some cocktails to start, and then they taste through the 10, 12, 15, 20, and 23, and we don't have to charge them too much for it, and they get a 7-course dinner. So I appreciate what you've done to try to curtail that secondary market.
Yeah, it's the real problem with it is, well, I guess two problems. Number one, it's illegal because the liquor laws are very, very strict in this country, and really in Kentucky they're quite strict, although they're at least loosening up a little bit as far as shipping and so forth. But if you buy something on the internet, you might not get the real deal. You might get counterfeit, and there's a lot of that going on, a whole lot of it going on. So we can't control that, but all we can do is put our suggested retail prices out there, which are anywhere from $70 to $300 and something for the 23. So we're happy for restaurants like yourselves and liquor stores that charge a decent markup and aren't unkind to their customers. I'll just say it that way.
Have you ever been up to Delaware? You been to Delaware before?
I never have. I've been all around it, but Virginia, D.C., Maryland, and so forth, but Pennsylvania, but have never been that way.
Yeah, many areas we're considered the suburbs of Philadelphia.
That's right.
You said we have an accent. Is that what you said?
Yeah, a little similar to the Philadelphia/Maryland accent. It's a little bit distinctive.
We pronounce water, water.
Well, Julian, I
Yes,
really
there's a
want
lot of
to
that
say
going
thank
on.
you, and I appreciate your time. And we appreciate you being here. I guess that the book that Carl mentioned earlier, the Pappy Land book, your sister wrote that. Is that right?
No, my sister wrote a book in 1999. I should have brought a prop with me.
What's the name of the one
Right
she
over
wrote?
here, if
I'm
I can
sorry.
grab mine. But she wrote one, but it's called "But Always Find Bourbon," and it's got a picture of Pappy, lighting the cigar on the cover, and it's basically the story of my grandfather and our family in the whiskey business through the ownership of Stitzel Weller. And then it goes on to how we got the distillery, or how Pappy built it. And my dad worked for Pappy after the war, and struggled with the business and was forced to sell it, but then started this new brand. And then there is a chapter in there about what I kind of carried on with, as far as the Pappy label, and then the book that I just was part of. It wasn't my idea, but it's called Pappy Land, and it's written by Wright Thompson, who's a friend and is a senior writer for ESPN. And this idea was hatched by a book agent of a chef in Oxford, Mississippi, where Wright's from, and they came up with this idea 4 or 5 years ago, and I was a little skeptical because I'm not interested in a book about myself or story or so forth. It's just not my cup of tea. But Wright did a great job of capturing our family history and our story. And my daughter's business, they have a dry good business using our brand, so to speak, and it's doing great. So it's a great story. And he came up with a story and matched his life with my life, and it's a fascinating read. It's very little of it is about bourbon. It's mostly about fathers and sons and relationships, and it's called The Story of Family Fine Bourbon and Things That Last, which really explain everything. So it's a great little read. It's only about 400 pages, if that many, maybe only 250 something. Short read, but he did a great job. So we've had a lot of success with it, and it's been out a couple months. So thanks for bringing it up. But that's the two books that our family has: my sister's book and this book that just came out.
Okay, and your sister's book one more time.
It's called But Always Find Bourbon, the story of old Fitzgerald.
And that one's available, I know, on your website, because I've seen it there.
Yeah, they both are available on our website, and if not, it's my daughter's website is pappyco.com, which they sell both the books there too.
I buy many a box of cigars from there.
Well, thank you. They are mighty fine. Try the maple syrup too. That's exceptional.
Yeah, I love the Pappy Family Reserve, the Toro size particularly. That Perique tobacco at the end is just fabulous.
Well, thank you. They, Drew Estates makes those for us, and they really do a nice job. They're so well made, which is the impressive part. There's nothing worse, as you know, a cigar falling apart or not drawing or so whatever. But the Drew Estates does a great job with their production, so we're happy with that.
Oh, I want to thank you, Pappy, for letting me spend my birthday with you. It's been a pleasure.
Happy birthday, Carl.
Yeah, the big 7-0.
7-0.
7-0.
Well, you're almost catching up to
He's
Julian
a
here.
little bit older than
say.
me, but
I hope you never catch up.
You have 2 more years experience here than Carl, I guess. Is that what you said? You're 72. Carl's now 70.
I'm just 71 and a half.
Julian, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for your time. And folks, check out the Pappy Van Winkle website for cigars, for books. What else do you have on there for people that want to enjoy it?
The girls, it's their separate business, but they've got bourbon barrel aged maple syrup and clothing and glassware and some really unique stuff they come up with. It's I had a son. My wife and I had a son, Preston, and then 18 months later we had 3 identical triplet girls. So that's that company. So we had an instant family, but they've done a great job, and they've really they're blowing us away with their business acumen. So they really do a great job.
Well, I hope you're having a really good night. Our next guest is Wright Thompson, who wrote this book, Pappy Land. New York Times bestselling author, Wright Thompson, and he's a senior ESPN writer. the cool thing for me is after reading Pappyland, I want to read all of his cool articles on ESPN. I want to see his True South episodes, which he's an executive producer. So I finally had to bite the bullet and pay for the ESPN Plus. So I got that subscription, and he wrote a really cool piece 2 days ago about Patrick Mahomes and about Kansas City. He lives in Kansas City, so I guess he's rooting for the Chiefs this weekend. But anyway, it was we've sent a lot of messages back and forth, text messages, emails. We talked on the phone, great conversation. When I read Pappyland, and Julian van Winkle says Wright Thompson is a true wordsmith. He really is a wordsmith. He has a way with words. But for me, he has a way of making you feel like you're riding along with Julian. And whatever the things that your life experiences, as you open a bottle of bourbon and you go back years and think about something that happened, many years ago, there's just so many parallels with what the Van Winkles go through to keep their business alive, and what a lot of small businesses go through, and what families go through. So I recommend the book. It's really, 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 really good. And Wright, thanks for spending the time with us, on the phone and on camera now. And I just want to ask if you had one overview for our guest here tonight, with all the experiences that you have with Julian van Winkle and your experience with writing Pappyland, what would you tell us?
I'm a sports writer in my real life, so excuse the sports metaphor, but if you were going to have a swing thought for tonight about this whiskey and this dinner, it would be this, that, as I write about in the book, every bottle of whiskey like this is the work of a tremendous amount of care. Care from Julian and his family. I believe Carrie's there with you tonight as well. To keep this alive for generations, you can read the story about that in the book, but it's sort of a minor miracle that stuff even exists. There's a tremendous amount of care from everybody at Buffalo Trace, from the people who run the still to the real artists who move the barrels around the warehouse. There's a tremendous amount of human sweat and attention to detail in every bottle.
You had a really interesting perspective about what it means to open up an old whiskey, and I think you said it, best. Not to be, morbid, but there are probably, there's whiskeys that are being made now and put into barrels that the folks that are making them just won't. They might not be around to taste them when they're finally bottled. But when we're here tonight tasting these 10, 12, 15, 20, 23-year-old whiskeys, just kind of explain me your perspective on that, your take on it.
With really old bottles, it's interesting. There's this orchid that only blooms for one night. And I thought about that a lot while writing this book. One time Julie and I were drinking some whiskey, and he was like, it's really fragile. You take an old bottle of whiskey and you open the cork, and, it starts to change pretty fast. And I think that's because the hidden or secret ingredient in a really great whiskey or a really great bottle of wine or anything is the metaphysical ideas of the past and home and family that are trapped in the bottle with the liquid. And when you pop the cork, a little bit of 15 or 20 or 23 years ago comes out. And I think that is what's really going on here, is that every time you open that bottle, a brief bit of 23 years ago is in the room with you, or 20 or 15. And that means everybody who was in our lives then, they're in the room again. You think about the family members or, who are no longer here, or your friends. A really old bottle of whiskey conjures them in a really interesting way and a really profound, important way. So my thought, that I hope that, as you celebrate with friends and enjoy a meal and, this incredible whiskey, that's what you think about. And, those things were thought about in the making of it. And the almost accidental byproduct of that is that they should, in a really organic way, evoke those things for you. Again, it was a real honor to be a tiny part of this.
Wright, I appreciate your time. I mean, you're a sports writer during Super Bowl week, and you're spending a little bit of time with us. I know you were in Newark a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago, when there was still a Cluck You chicken. There's no more Cluck You, but there's always a spot for you at Caffe Gelato. Thanks for being here. Next up is Carrie Greener, Julian van Winkle's daughter, to talk about her business, Pappy and Company. Well, Carrie Greener is with us from Pappy and Company, one of Julian van Winkle's daughters. And Carrie, you're triplets, is that right?
Yes, crazily enough. It's fun information for other people, I guess. We're identical triplets.
Typical questions like who's older and all that kind of stuff. But you guys started a company 7 years ago, Pappy and Company. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Yeah, we started about 7 years ago with my two sisters. At the time, I was in between jobs. Louise was pregnant with twins, I think, and Chenault, our third sister, who had the idea with us, she was doing interior design, and so we started the business together, but Louise and I run it and have kind of taken charge in the last 7 years. But we started mainly to fill the need for promotional products associated with this special, well-known brand that we found ourselves being a part of. And so, there's a famous brand out there in the world usually has like a cool hat or t-shirt you can wear to represent it. And so we realized that that was just something missing in the story of our family's business. So we started that way, and then it's just quickly evolved into other cool things where now we really focus more on specialty products. Like we have a whole barrel-aged food line. Our best sellers are actually cigars. We're in a partnership with Drew Estate, which is a lot of what we do with a lot of our products is amazing partnerships. So we work with other independent companies who make an exceptional product. So together bring something really special that you can't find anywhere else. So that's really been what's driving us forward, are these really cool partnerships and really neat products that are really special.
Do you sell products that are not associated with Pappy's too?
Not associated. Yeah, we sell all kinds of things in regards to, our barrel-aged maple syrup is aged in our retired Pappy barrels, but it's not, I think what's cool about what we're doing is we're making products that even people who aren't obsessed with bourbon or obsessed with our family's business or brand would appreciate and enjoy. So we're just making quality products like a hot sauce that, again, is aged in our retired barrels, but if you're a hot sauce lover and you appreciate good hot sauce, then you'd love our product. So we're doing stuff like that, but it always seems to be products that are inspired by, even if they're not totally closely related to our family business, they're definitely products that are inspired by our heritage and just the things that we know and like.
For this dinner tonight, we sent folks a couple mixed drinks to start from Buffalo Trace, the Stag Junior Manhattan, and an Eagle 10 Old Fashioned, and we have one of our bartenders showing them how to make the drinks. But I don't know if someone's not so good at it. You have drink mixes that they can buy, right?
Yeah, so one partnership is with Bitter Milk out of Charleston, South Carolina, and they just found themselves making delicious craft cocktails and realized that anybody should be able to make these at home. And so we sell a barrel-aged old-fashioned mixer, so you literally can just add bourbon and the Bitter Milk old-fashioned cocktail mixer and maybe a little orange rind if you want, and ice, and it's just tastes like someone's made you the best cocktail you've ever had. So that's fun, and that's been amazing, actually. How well that's done this year with COVID. Everybody's at home making better drinks than they ever have, I think.
we have a restaurant, so we're scared about that. People are getting used to staying at home. We're going to have to try to get them back into the restaurant. This dinner tonight that we're doing...
They'll be ready to get out.
Say it again, Carrie.
Oh, I just said, I'm sure they'll be ready to get out. I'm ready to go out and have some good food and someone else make my cocktail, even though it's nice to know how to make them at home.
I suppose if they use one of your mixes, do you have a Manhattan mix? I want to ask. Do you have a Manhattan mix?
We have a recipe, actually. So we don't sell a pre-mixed product, but my dad has a recipe. He might tell you about it, but he calls it his Manhattan. But it's just a little twist on a traditional Manhattan.
Okay, so I'll tell you. If you want, maybe we can put up a graphic of that recipe if you want to. Maybe people try it at home. Listening and reading. I should say reading, but sometimes when driving around, I listen to it. But the Pappy Land book, there was a part that said you and your sisters were arrested for walking under the influence. Is that true?
Yeah. It's funny how many texts and emails I've gotten on that. That they never knew that we got arrested walking. But yeah, we weren't hooligans, but we definitely were teenagers, and we were doing the responsible thing, which was walking while drinking. So unfortunately, the cops didn't think so, but luckily our parents did, and we didn't get in trouble. They thought we were completely appropriate and just doing everything we were supposed to at 16 or whatever age we were. So it was more of a hassle for them because then they had to deal with us because they had to drive us to the courthouse. But it was funny. I forgot that made the book.
It kind of surprised me because I was like, wow. I figured in Delaware you'd probably get in trouble for a lot of drinking stuff, but I figured down in Kentucky they'd be a little more lax. I should say.
Well. Maybe in Kentucky. We were actually in Michigan where we go in the summer, and it was like a little resort community, and I think they were just bored or something, needed something to do to come after just kids walking around town. It's funny.
When you were growing up, there was a point, I guess, when your dad took over the company and was working really hard to save the company and grow the company, but to make sure that I guess you guys could go on vacation. That there was a point in that book where he said, I guess when Wild Turkey, is that what it is? Said they wouldn't sell him any more bourbon, and he didn't know if you guys go on that vacation anymore. Growing up, were you shielded from all that? Did you know that there was a possibility that there wouldn't be more Pappy Van Winkle, or did you have an idea that small business is hard sometimes?
Yeah, we really didn't know the ins and outs at all, and not because I think they intentionally kept it from us, but I think we just never. It was just the goings-ons of trying to run a small family business and resurrect it, and so I think those types of things probably happened throughout his career until he finally had success. But we knew he worked really hard, and we'd go to the bottling plant with him, and we'd literally see the blood and the sweat that he'd come home with from the laborious job that it was, because he was literally doing everybody's job. So he was, driving the old truck down to the rick house, picking up the barrels, dumping the barrels. He did the whole process, and then he literally only had help with bottling it. And he would even get the pallets ready to ship out. So it was absolutely crazy. But so we saw all that, and we saw how hard he was working, but we never knew the risk involved, and we never knew really what his end goal was. And honestly, I think because he just knew that all he knew was how to work and to work hard and do what he knew was right. And that's what he knew, obviously, in his gut was right. And so he never wavered from that, but obviously had all of those struggles throughout. But I think it was pretty amazing for us because we saw how hard he worked, and he didn't even have to tell us. And we also lived a very modest life. So we were never, we had everything we needed and wanted. Obviously, we never got a go-kart or a trampoline, but, we had a great life. And all of our needs were met. And so looking back, I don't think we would have ever wanted any more. And I think it obviously did so much for us as business owners and, seeing how we want to raise our own kids, seeing the way we were raised in all those ways that, but so I think we kind of just knew just enough, honestly. We could tell he was stressed, and I'm sure my mom showed actually that his stress more than he did, but, cause he just got quiet. But yeah.
Was there a point for you? Was it high school, post college, that you realized, hey, it's the brand's working out. It's kind of taking off. It's getting pretty hot. And my dad's hard work paid off.
To an extent, I realized that Dad was having success, but it never really was a big topic or a big thought. Honestly, it was just a really natural progression that. I think that's just kind of the way we live in anyway, that it never was a thing. Until other people started making it a thing. And then you realize it's a thing, but not until someone else tells you it is.
Well, I'll ask you a couple follow-up questions from that then. Do you appreciate the anonymity of your married name?
Yeah.
And maybe
It's nice.
And not living back home, I guess. Where are you located now?
I live in Sun Valley, Idaho. Yeah.
So maybe your neighbors know. And I just as a psyche question, I was always wondering if someone comes to you and asks if you could just happen to snag them a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle, if they ask if it's for a charity, do they feel less guilty doing so?
Probably.
Are they less shy?
I think
at
my
least?
friends now. What?
I said, are they less shy at least?
Yeah, it's either that it's unfortunate that, of course, we would love to help all those friends and, quite frankly, strangers daily who reach out with amazing causes because they're all worthy. But it is funny how friends now know not to even ask, because once they know how little I get personally, it makes sense why they shouldn't get a bottle either.
I can't remember if you told me or if Louise told me. I think top selling is cigars. Is that right?
Yeah. It was one of our first collaborations, and obviously, it made sense for one because Pappy was an avid cigar smoker, but obviously, the famous label of him smoking a cigar just makes a lot of sense to create that product. But we wouldn't have what we have without our cigar partner Drew Estate, who makes a really special cigar, and it's really different, but it's very quite likable by most everybody who smokes it. But I won't go into all the details unless you really want, because it's got a special blend that's associated with.
Well, I'll tell you what. Why don't I know just we have about 150 people here tonight for the dinner, and off the top of my head, I know a dozen folks that would be interested in a cigar. And in fact, one guy has brought one with him tonight. And in Delaware, talk about like if you can't get it, and there's always a liquor store that's upset that they can't get more Pappies or something like that. At least we can go to Pappy and Company and get cigars and other memorabilia. So in Delaware, it's pretty cool for folks to get the Pappy cigar. So yeah, if you could have a second and you could talk to us about it, and I think that would be nice for the folks.
Yeah. Okay, so we have two different blends. One is called our Pappy Van Winkle Tradition, and it's exactly that. It's just a really traditional cigar that I can't speak is specific about as our barrel fermented, which is really special because part of the blend comes from Kentucky fire-cured tobacco, which is grown in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And then it's fire-cured in the barn after the tobacco's dried, which is usually traditionally used for like pipe tobacco. Smoked tobacco is traditionally not used in premium cigars. So that's already something a little bit different. And then they ship that fire-cured tobacco to St. James Parish, a little parish outside of New Orleans, Louisiana, where the Perique process is done using our bourbon barrels. So traditionally cigars are made of fermented tobacco, but usually they're fermented in pilones, which are literally just piles of tobacco laid strategically in mounds. And then over time, the tobacco naturally ferments, and that's how you get that really leathery, pretty texture of a tobacco leaf. But they recreate that process in bourbon barrels. So it's called the Perique process, which is specific to this region of the country, and it's the only area in the country that does this. And generally, there's also a Perique tobacco grown in that St. James Parish, Louisiana. But anyway, we take the fire-cured tobacco and ferment it in our bourbon barrels, and they crank down on the bourbon barrel to create the pressure with huge cranks, metal cranks. And the tobacco ferments for a year, and then they ship it to Nicaragua, where they're processed into our cigars and then shipped to us. So they're really different, but likable, like I said, and just extra special.
We talked about cigars, and then your top other categories are food. So I guess maple syrup and some of the drink mixes. Are there other food also that you sell?
We have a couple chocolates. We have bourbon balls and a brittle made with cacao nibs that were aged in our retired bourbon barrels. And then, we have a barrel-aged coffee and a few other things. And then the third best category for us is barware. We have some wholesale business, so we have some decent size online accounts, but generally speaking, that only takes care of like 17% of our business. So we're mostly direct to consumer online, and we don't sell on Amazon or anything like that.
You've had the business now for 7 years. Is it going okay? Have you experienced some sales growth? Do you feel like it's directly tied to the popularity of the product? Because I think we've noticed, at least here in Delaware, that over the past 7 years, the Pappy brand has has grown exponentially, even though it was already famous. And is there anything that you learned growing up from a small business perspective that has helped you in this endeavor?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's something that I don't think I realized what it was all about until after I'd been in business for a while. But looking back and kind of understanding what's all these generations before us have done and what we're doing without realizing it, but now understanding it and using it to our benefit is really just thinking about the quality of the product. It sounds kind of cliche knowing that's who we are, but it's so true. And I think if you want to have success, you really can't look just at the money and where the growth you want to see and how much money you want to make. Because I think what I realized looking at this book and, seeing what my dad did, like he wasn't thinking about the money, even though he needed the money and he needed to make a living. He really was just focused on the product. And obviously, luckily, he had a great palate to help resurrect his business. But for us, we've done the same. I think when we started this business, same thing. We needed a job. It was a way for us to get involved with the family business and feel inspired by the work that we were doing. But we never set out with a goal to make a lot of money. So I think that's the biggest thing for us, what I've realized, and what we naturally, without even realizing, have just taken from those before us. And what we're doing is just really focus on the product, and the rest will come. And we're definitely finding success, and it's really cool to see where we started and where we've come. But I honestly think if we looked at the money as our main priority, we would not be where we are today, for sure.
Well, I really appreciate that. And there's a lot of folks joining us tonight that are small business owners. We have everything from construction and mechanical engineers to other restaurateurs, and I think we can all relate to what you're saying. The one thing I don't know that we necessarily can relate to is though I guess how famous your family has gotten or has been, and did you feel a sense of pressure to live up to that when you were opening your merchandise business?
Yeah, honestly, I've never felt pressure. I definitely feel what's the word? It's a responsibility, for sure. because we're using our family's name to to make a living. So that's a big task, I guess. But yeah, no, I think we just keep our heads down and just do what we know is right, and we do it the right way, or at least we try to. You can't be perfect at anything, but as long as you just try to stay true as you can to who you are and what you know is right and what you want to do and who you want to be, then, like I said, I think the rest is easier if you just keep that strong foundation. And for us, for some reason, it seems easier. And I think maybe just because we have such a solid family heritage that it's really easy to stay on track because we have so much history. So I think that's one thing. Well, there's many things that we have to be fortunate for in regards to starting a business and everything else. But
is there anything this year that Delaware folks can look for, any new products from Pappy and Company?
Yep, we're excited to launch a barrelwood smoked food line soon. So starting with smoked fish, and then also we're starting to barrel age nuts. So we're in the R&D stage of that, and so those are really exciting. So more food.
Well, Carrie, thank you so much for joining us tonight. If you ever make it to Delaware, you have cousins in Philadelphia, you said?
Yes.
All right. Well, if you go,
well, thank you.
Yeah, if you go out and visit them, we're only 20 minutes south of the airport. You can drop down, cross the state line, and visit another state. We'd love to have you here
Awesome.
in Delaware.
Well, it seems like you all have an amazing thing going, and I'm envious of your special meal. That's one thing I'm lacking.
There you go. We'll
really good food.
We'll get you some dark chocolate gelato. We're sending some down to your dad when he gets back from his trip, and
yum.
we'll share some with you also. So thank you so much, Carrie. Have a good night.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Julio Ruiz joins us to talk about this Riedel single malt whiskey glass. If you pick the dinner up tonight to take it home, or if you're dining with us tonight at Caffe Gelato, here's Julio Ruiz with the single malt whiskey glass. We have Julio Ruiz from Riedel. We're holding the newly designed rocks glasses.
Yes.
So these are the glasses that we used for the first two drinks. We had the Stag Hatton, which was a Stag Junior Classic Manhattan, and then we had the Eagle 10 year for an old fashioned. So these were great for that. And then I wanted to get into specifically with you for a little bit. Tasting through in the Riedel glass, the 10, 12, 15, 20, and 23 year.
Absolutely. So first of all, the glass that we're all holding is a fairly new collection of ours, introduced in 2018. It's called Drink Specific Glassware. It's a very modern design. We actually were very fortunate to work with a mixologist out of New York City. His name is Zane Harris. And him with the Riedel family created this beautiful design. And I hope that you at home can see it and feel it. But the best part, besides the aesthetic of the glass, is that it actually has a hidden 2-ounce mark in the glass. Huh. So especially when you're drinking such rare wines, I apologize, I drink so much wine, such rare spirits like we're about to enjoy today, this little paddle right up to the tip there is actually a 2-ounce marking. So now you know how much you're drinking per the night. So I hope you guys enjoyed this beautiful Stag Hat. Cheers.
Thank you. Cheers. So I say let's get right into the pours. We've pre-poured here 10, 12, 15, 20, and 23. Okay.
Perfect. All right, so the next beautiful tasting, as we like to call it, is our 10-year-old. And we've actually chosen tonight our Riedel single malt whiskey glass, which we think is the perfect bourbon glass as well. So I think what you personally will enjoy is that the glass itself is very aesthetically pleasing. But most importantly, just like a Riedel wine glass, how does it perform as far as the beverage inside of the glass? So let's go ahead and dive right in for the first time in the 10-year-old. And of course, Julian, I'm sure, has talked about this already. And obviously now we just want to nose the beverage for the first time. And definitely what you would expect from a 10-year-old. And what I want you to pay attention to, just like you would pay attention to nosing the wine, is what kind of aromas come out of the glass. Is it inviting? Is it friendly? And here right away you definitely get that smoky character that you definitely wish to have. But more importantly, not the alcohol nose that you would expect to drink out of a spirit, right? And let's go ahead and take a sip. You notice that the beverage actually hits you just behind the tip of the tongue. Look at how beautifully expressed it is. You definitely get that beautiful caramel notes for sure. But most importantly, the aftertaste. You notice how long the aftertaste is and extremely well laid out. Would you agree?
I would. I always hear about whether to use single malt like I have here. There's another glass that some folks use. Glen, what is it called?
Something like that. Glencairn.
Okay, and of course, last year when we did this dinner, we had simply small rocks glasses.
Yeah.
So I think if folks are having this at home, maybe compared to a rocks glass or a neat glass, why does this perform better?
Yeah, obviously, let's talk a little bit about the introduction of the glass itself. Back in early 1990, I want to say 1991, we actually worked with a lot of Scotch producers to create this glass. And we did this through a workshop. Just the way that Riedel creates wine glasses, it's actually through a workshop. It's not just like, hey, look at this shape, let's go ahead and call this a single malt whiskey glass, let's go ahead and call this X. We actually work with a lot of producers. And in this case, we went to the master distillers in Scotland, and we actually did a workshop. We put 50 different glasses in front of them, and we eliminated one glass until there was the remaining shape and size to what we see here today. So this is what we call our single malt whiskey glass.
It's like a 30, this has now been around for about 30 years.
It's about almost 30 years. So it was introduced in 1992. And of course, as Riedel can be, we of course use our glasses for multi-use. And I have personally been to Louisville, Kentucky. Hopefully I'm not butchering the name. I know Louisville, perhaps, as you're down there. And I've actually tasted Pappy and Winkle down there with this glass. And I absolutely found it to be absolutely stunning. So I hope you guys enjoy it home as well.
Yeah, I like the way that you don't get overwhelmed with the alcohol nose.
Correct.
So,
and it's the same way that you would think about a wine glass. Sometimes when you pour a wine in a non-Riedel glass or incorrectly, sometimes you get too much of the alcohol, which is not what you want in wine and certainly not what you want to get in spirits. In this case, you definitely get that smoky character for sure. And when you taste, again, you notice that you definitely get that initial sensation, but afterwards it just becomes so smooth, which is exactly what you want to have.
Let's do this. Let's jump over to Carl Kadar, who will talk a little bit more, maybe a little bit bourbon history, rye versus wheat, but also about this Rip Van Winkle 10-year, and then we can delve into the 12, 15, 20, and 23. Okay, so let's go ahead and taste through the 10, 12, 15, 20, and then get to the 23. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, 10-year-old in the Riedel single malt whiskey glass. As a matter of fact, this glass was created in 1991 and introduced into 1992, and we actually worked with master distillers in Scotland to create what is currently in front of us, the single malt whiskey glass. However, I feel like this is the perfect bourbon glass as well, and I think we're about to nose why. So let's go ahead and dive right into the 10-year-old.
I've seen people use like, I don't know, neat glasses or tulip glasses.
Yeah, yeah, and so have we, of course, being in the wine glass industry. What you notice from our glass compared to some other glassware, as far as bourbon or spirits glasses, is that our glass actually flares out versus flaring in. And what we notice is, of course, because we've done a lot of workshops throughout the year, is that when you have a vessel that flares in, it's actually going to hit you more towards the tip of the tongue, bringing out some sweetness. Versus when we taste out of this glass, you're going to notice it's going to hit you just behind the tip of the tongue, bringing out some sweetness, but also balancing what's to come. So that's definitely the difference. And of course, it does help with the aromas, which we love in this glass for sure, compared to maybe something that flares in, actually concentrates aromas a little too much, more alcohol, versus again in here you definitely get much more of the smokiness behind the wine for sure.
Well,
The beverage, I apologize.
That's just what I was going to say. I mean, I'm used to grabbing an immediate nose with a little bit of alcohol, and this is...
Correct, quite the opposite.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and nose it once more, and let's go ahead and taste, and focus on where the spirit is delivered.
And show it to me, if you don't mind, in the neat glass as well. I mean,
For sure.
I mean, and I think most people have the opportunity to have this Riedel glass tonight, but if they're having it from a neat glass...
So in a neat glass, and again, when we nose it, where's the beverage? Non-existent, right?
Yeah.
Versus if we just refresh our memories, in the single malt whiskey glass, there's the full expression. So here, again, nothing wrong with this glass. It's a perfect cocktail glass, but as far as something neat on what we're about to enjoy, I think you notice that it's going to be slightly different. So let's go ahead and taste. And I think here, you notice that the beverage is a bit more, I hate to use the word harsh, but you definitely notice a completely different experience, not exactly as smooth as it was from the single malt whiskey glass. And more importantly, we love to nose our beverages. And in this, the neat glass, we got no aromas. There was no excitement. There was no, hey, I'm coming. But in the single malt whiskey glass, you definitely get that kind of first experience for sure.
Well, I'm excited to use the single malt whiskey since we're tasting this year now the 12 limited reserve and then the 15, 20, and 23-year-old Pappies. What's the secret mark here? Is this still a 2 ounce or is this a 1 ounce?
So the neat glass also does have a 2 ounce marking on here. So you notice that, of course, since it's a narrower bowl, of course, the 2 ounce marking is higher for sure. So
you call it paddles?
Yes.
That's cool. Okay.
Yeah. So it's the same idea that you know how much you're drinking for the night, especially if you're driving. Not these days, but eventually.
Okay. So we'll get into the 12.
Absolutely.
So Van Winkle Special Reserve, 12-year Lot B.
So I think once again, let's go ahead and nose it because we love to nose our beverages, right? Especially this gorgeous bourbon. And I think if you go back to the 10-year-old, and let's go ahead and nose that one as a reference point, what a dramatic difference from the 10 to the Reserve 12. Wow. Definitely much more of a perfume note for me. Not exactly as expressive as it was from the 10-year-old that we just enjoyed, but if you dive in, you definitely get that secondary aroma for sure. And let's go ahead and taste. Completely different experience. It hit you exactly the same part as the first one, but you notice a completely different taste. A completely different characteristic.
Yeah.
Right? So again, this is the beauty of having an appropriate glass, because unfortunately if you drank it, let's say out of the neat glass, it's kind of like a tidal wave coming at you versus a controlled speed bump in a way of speaking. And this is exactly what the single malt whiskey glass will do.
I think for my reasoning behind it this year is these are very much limited releases, as everyone knows, and it's a challenge to kind of compile the collection to give everybody a chance to taste them, because if you go to a liquor store, you can't just simply go and order any of these. They're just not available. I mean, maybe in Kentucky, but not here in Delaware. So by compiling them here tonight, we all get a chance to taste them, but I wanted to taste them the right way.
Absolutely.
And so this is a neat way of doing it here in these single malt whiskey Riedel glasses.
Of course, and thank you for the Van Winkle family to allow us to be here, and hopefully Julian is also enjoying them out of the single malt whiskey glass at home or wherever you may be.
I'll tell you what we will do. My guess is he already has them. But
let's hope so.
We'll send him a set. How about that?
We'll definitely make sure he has some.
Okay.
Afterwards, for sure.
All right, so we're on to the 15 year.
Yep.
Folks that know Pappy's well, thank you, seem to think this is showing very nicely here in 2020.
Yeah. So I think you all at home certainly have now enjoyed, for the third time, about to enjoy the beauty of the glass. But let's see, even though it's still bourbon, obviously they have different characteristics, right? It's a much older vintage, right? I think vintage is correct to use, right?
Sure.
In this
Yeah.
world, right? I apologize. I drink so much wine at home. You tell me anything about wine. As far as spirits, I'm a bit of a novice, but a 15-year-old, of course, longer aging, longer barrel aging. So on the nose, wow. Again, from the first to the second to the third, completely different aromas. And again, focus on how inviting the aromas are, right? Again, I always like to say it's like meeting a person for the first time. If you've never had Pappy before in a Riedel single malt whiskey glass, these aromas are, besides what you would hope that you're about to experience, it's just like, this is exactly what I wanted to get, right? Let's go ahead and taste. And again,
It's
right
really
behind
good.
the tip of the
It's
tongue.
really, really good.
And you can see the intensity from the 10-year-old to the 12-year-old to now the 15-year-old, how it changes. But you still have that beautiful characteristic, nicely expressed. Forget about adding a drop of water in there. I mean, this is just perfectly versed in a way. And I, again, haven't had this for many years. I would say this is quite a fantastic experience so far.
Carl, if I could, in that, you're right. I agree with you 100%. Fantastic experience. I mean, part of us throughout the year is the fun of collecting the bottles and creating the relationships with the companies, the distributors here in Delaware, and of course in this case with Riedel. I want to talk to Carl a little bit again. I want to go back to Carl and just kind of delve into a little bit more of the taste characteristics and a little more of history between, now that we've done the 10-year Rip Van Winkle and the 12-year Family Reserve, and now this first 15-year Pappy. So Carl, take it away for a bit, and then Julio and I will be ready for the 20 and 23.
And Carl, don't worry, we'll definitely make sure you have the single malt whiskey glass at home as well, or wherever you may be.
Rip Van Winkle. So like I mentioned before, I mean, learning about bourbon is fun for me. So it's fun to talk to you. It's obviously an honor to talk with Julian. I'd love to hear what you get when you're tasting.
Well, the nose on this is a little subdued. You can smell the alcohol because I believe that the 10-year-old is 107 proof. Is that right? So it's like 53%.
Let me grab it. It is 107.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you can get the sweet alcohol aroma. And as with most bourbons, you're picking up stuff out of the barrel where you're going to get your vanilla, cinnamon, sweet, as you would expect a high alcohol bourbon to be. The alcohol actually adds sweetness. That's why I prefer to use batch strength if I can get it, as opposed to the watered down 43 or 46%.
You talked to me about the finish and how maybe it's not, but certainly with the 15,
Finish,
20.
I get butterscotch, a little citrus. And it's a fairly long finish. It goes on and on. Since it's only been in the barrel 10 years, you're not going to get a heavily oaky flavor, which is good. Oh, maple syrup. It's a very nice whiskey for a 10-year-old, yeah.
Yeah. And and what I was referring to with the finishes is the length you were saying. You're saying so you'll get a good bourbon that has a short finish, and then here with these Pappies you might get a longer finish.
Yeah, you try something like a well, you got one, the Elmer T. Lee there, or some of the others. If let's use Buffalo Trace, just a regular Buffalo Trace whiskey. They're really good up front, sweet, and very tasty up front, mid palate. But then when it gets to the finish, it almost waters down and drops off a cliff. It's just like it's gone. Tasted good when I had it in my mouth. I swallowed it. I could taste it for a little while and then it's just gone. And there's a lot of bourbons that are like that. And generally they're the less expensive ones. And the requirements on bourbon are that it has to be at least 51% corn. And beyond that, there are generally 3 different grains that you can use. You can use rye, you can use wheat, or you can use barley. Now, for most bourbons, they will always use barley. And the reason for that is barley contains an enzyme that aids in the fermentation process of the mash. And when I say aids, think higher yield, more alcohol, which is also good, because bourbon's just a business. Most of the original whiskey in the U.S., in the colonies, was rye. And whiskey was important back then because whiskey was not just something that you made so that you could kind of have a drink in the winter. What you did was you had your excess grain and you didn't want your excess grain to go to waste, so you converted it to whiskey. And the grain that was grown at the time was rye. And yes, it's a cold weather grain. So it'll grow from, the mid-Atlantic on up through the Northeast and on into the Maritimes in Canada. And it grows well in cool weather. Well, there's a little thing called the whiskey tax. After the Revolutionary
Andrew Hamilton,
War,
or was it before that?
Huh?
Hamilton, or?
No, well, Hamilton was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time when this was implemented. George Washington was one of the biggest rye whiskey producers in the colonies. He used to make whiskey at Mount Vernon, and you can still buy. They recreated the distillery at Mount Vernon, and you can still buy whiskey that's produced in the old stills that are modeled after the originals. And it's actually quite good, but it's also very expensive because there's not much of it around. So Washington made rye whiskey. Well, after the Revolutionary War, of course, the country was deeply in debt to pay for the war. And Hamilton, who was the Secretary of the Treasury at the time, decided that, well, we could tax whiskey. Well, farmers were in an uproar because, like I said, farmers were using their excess grain to make whiskey, and whiskey was basically money. You could trade it for goods and services. So when this came about, all of the farmers started revolting, and that's what they called the Whiskey Rebellion. And what you found was there were a lot of people in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area that started moving further west to get away from the government. The further west they moved, the bigger the less chances were that the revenuers would come after them for their taxes. And eventually people migrated as far as Kentucky. Now once they got to Kentucky, Kentucky was a little bit warmer and didn't grow rye very well, but wheat was in abundance. So they used wheat instead of rye. And as Julian told you, when we talked to him, the wheat adds a bit of a sweetness and softness. It makes the whiskey seem that it's older when it's young, and it actually ages better than rye-based whiskey. So that's how you wound up with a Maker's Mark is also the same. It's a wheated bourbon, and there are a couple of them out there. Larceny is another one.
Are these Buffalo Trace products?
Well, not all of them.
Weller, there's a Weller.
Weller is wheated, yeah.
Okay.
But Buffalo Trace also makes some really great whiskeys. Colonel E.H. Taylor.
Yeah. That's a rye. Well, that's a rye.
No, that's a bourbon.
Well, what about the E.H. Taylor rye bourbon?
Well, that's new. That's relatively. They make a rye whiskey as well. Most of the lines do make rye whiskey. Rye, you'll find, is a little bit more expensive.
Okay.
And that's because the yield on rye whiskey is about half what it is on corn. Corn, let's see if I remember correctly, you'll wind up with about a 8% yield.
What about this antique collection stuff? You have, the George T. Stagg, the
Yep.
Eagle 17. Are those wheated?
No,
No.
no. The Weller is. The Stag isn't. There's also a couple of ryes in there. There's a Sazerac rye, and there's another one. I believe there are 2 ryes in the bunch and 3 bourbons. These come out about the same time that Pappy comes out, which is around Thanksgiving each year, November.
Yeah, we find that.
And retail price is fairly reasonable,
Right.
about $100 a bottle, which to some people might be very expensive, but in today's world, that's not bad, especially when you consider with the taxes that our government puts on Scotch whiskey. Scotch is much more expensive than bourbon
You know,
now.
speaking of Scotch, though, you think, you know, in talking about this and talking about Pappy's, and you think, okay, $100 isn't bad because, boy, you know, there's a liquor store might sell that for $300. But I remember getting Johnny Walker Blue for the restaurant, and wholesale it's costing $150. I'm like, boy, that's expensive. Now, if I could, you know,
Don't get me, well, I'll point out from the get-go that I am not a blended Scotch whiskey fan.
Yeah.
And that's all your Johnny Walkers, Chivas Regals, whatever. I prefer single malt whiskey, which is not blended. If that were a bottle of Scotch, for example, about 20% of that whiskey right there, about 20% of this bottle, right about up here, not this is bourbon, but if it was Scotch, about 20% of this would be blended single malt Scotch whiskeys. The other 80% of the bottle is going to be nothing but grain alcohol. So, not that I have anything against grain alcohol, but it's just diluted.
we touched on it briefly, and I think, talking to Julian van Winkle, I think I'm going to go out and get that book, The Pappy Land.
Yeah, it's a really great book, and it goes into the entire Van Winkle family, and it goes back into the history all the way from Pappy Van Winkle to Julian's days today. And as he said, it's true. It's mostly about relationships between fathers and sons. And the author, in fact, even weaves his own life through there, and his impending wife's childbirth.
And it's Wright Thompson. He's the ESPN guy.
He's an ESPN. Yeah, he's a relatively young guy, but he's a great writer. And it's some really interesting stories in there. About if you like Kentucky bourbon, racehorses, and all that stuff, it's all in there, and it's great.
You know bourbons pretty well. Do you have a favorite out of the ones tonight? The Pappy Van Winkle, the 12-year Family Reserve.
Yeah, as I said, my taste buds tell me that the 10, the 12 are good whiskeys. They'll hold up against any one of your major premium brands that you'd find today. The 15 and 20, I believe, are exceptional. To me, that's the sweet spot of aging bourbon, 15 to 20 years. The 23, I don't think is as good as the 15 and the 20. That's not to say that it is not an amazing whiskey, but the 15 and 20, I believe, are more amazing than the 23. So that's just my personal preference. I'm just fortunate that I've been able to taste all of them.
For me,
not many people haven't, and I know that. But
well, I feel the same way. I mean, there's
this is a 20, by the way, and it's amazing.
It's the first year that I've been able to taste these. So, you know, I spoke last year right before we started the dinner, and I said, hey, I'm going to do a Pappy Van Winkle dinner, and you said, okay, that's great. What are you serving? I said, well, I got the Stag Junior, I got the Eagle 10, I've got the George T. Stag, I've got the Pappy Rip Van Winkle 10. I got the Family Reserve 12, and then I don't know I think we finished with the George T. Stag. He said, well, that's not actually a Pappy dinner because you don't have any Pappy.
You can call it a Buffalo Trace dinner.
Right. And I think you inspired me this year to work with our distributors and make sure that we had our bartenders ready to serve all the Pappy line. But it was, again, by us getting together, thank you very much for doing this at home and at Caffe Gelato. For us getting together, we have 150 people that can try these. And so that's the thing. You know, sometimes they end up in a private collection. They're not tasted. And here they are, all of us together doing it tonight. It's fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Nice way to start off 2021, right?
That's right.
All right. So next will be 20-year-old.
Yep, 20.
So welcome back.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're back, Carl. Thank you, and we'll get back to you. So it's like, we'll come back and forth a little bit, have a little bit of a conversation. We'll share this afterwards, if you want to see it one more time. But thanks, coming back to the 20.
And I hope everybody has enjoyed so far. I think this is one of those drinks that you have to be very careful how much you consume at the end of the evening. So that 2-ounce marking that we were talking about earlier
That's right.
is going to come quite handy, even though you may have to just walk up the stairs after the evening. Very mindful to keep track of how much alcohol you're enjoying, and interesting to see if you drank before or after the event. So anyway.
Well, I appreciate saying. I mean, that is true, because if you have, let's see, 5 plus 2, that's 7 drinks. So, please, if you're drinking, do not drive. And if you're here at the restaurant, we'll take you home. Just ask any of our servers or bartender. If you're home, just, don't drive. So here we go. So we have...
Drink some water in between.
All right. So 20...
20-year-old is next.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and try this. Beautiful labels, as we all enjoy as well. So again, nothing new. Let's go ahead and nose it. And again, from one to the next, everyone just continues to impress on the nose. And need I say once more that on the nose, you want to dive right in, right? Definitely some smoky characters for sure. Definitely some of that caramel note for sure now for me. And very nutty. And let's go ahead and taste.
Wow. It's really, really good. I mean...
pretty impressive.
And I think, Carl's better at explaining it, but for me as a novice bourbon drinker, for that to hit, this is the first time for me tasting the 20-year.
Yep.
I was lucky enough to have a little bit at the 10-year during my 40th birthday party. A buddy of mine brought it, and we drank it, right? Which was what we were supposed to do. And then I was lucky enough to have a little bit of the 12-year last year and a little bit of the 15-year last year when we did this. This is the first time for me tasting the 20. Wow.
And if I do have to remember, when I was fortunate enough many years ago to be in Kentucky and to try this, I tried a 15, 20, and 23. And if we haven't tried a 23, nothing negative, but my personal favorite was actually the 20-year-old.
Okay.
So I hope everybody, whether it be you enjoy it or not, I hope you would agree that it's still quite nice. But again, very impressive for sure.
Okay, and we'll move right into the master of ceremony, I suppose.
Absolutely.
23.
So the 23-year-old.
Do you go belly to belly if you toast these?
You can try it. Let's try
That's
it.
it.
There you go. We always have to look at the
Cheers.
odds, right? And then now we can't even nose it. We have to try it now.
Wow.
But let's go ahead and nose it because it's so important to nose it first. It's like eating that chicken parmesan, right? That nose of the mozzarella. I don't know what your restaurant specifically uses. And I hope you have chicken parm, by the way. I just noticed that it just threw out an Italian dish out there. But the aromas of the sauce, of the basil, and all of that makes it all wonderful. That's what gets you hungry, in a way of speaking, right? So think about it the same way when you're drinking wine. Of course, enjoying the spirit, because on the nose, I mean, again, from the 10-year-old to the 12 to the 15 to the 20 to 23, they all have very different noses. And for me, the noses have progressed for something that, for me, is even more interesting than the last one, how amazingly enjoyable they were. And now, to nose this 23-year-old, I mean, again, it's like meeting a person for the first time. Yes, I like it. What's next, right? So let's go ahead and taste once more. Need I say more?
Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I hope you had a really good time. Special thanks to John Dunleavy from Light Action Production. Thanks for doing all the video. Thank you so much, Southern Wine and Spirits and Jason Holstein, for connecting us with Pappy Van Winkle. Thank you to Julio Ruiz from Riedel. Thank you, Wright Thompson, for writing Pappyland and for spending some time with us tonight. Special thanks to Julian van Winkle and to his daughter, Carrie. Thanks so much. Have a really good night.